Hi, folks. Welcome to the Princeton Review's Savvy Secondaries and interview tips for you. We seem to be having some issues with some folks logging in, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And if folks trickle in afterwards, just know I will send out this full webinar to everyone. So it's being recorded. You will get to it. And I apologize in advance. I'm not exactly sure what's happening because the link I sent out worked for me, but doesn't seem to be working for a lot of other people. Welcome to technology. My apologies. And honestly, when we get to the part of where we start talking about interview tips, it's going to bleed into a lot of what I talk about as many med schools are going to virtual or virtual in-person optional, and why I feel like if you can do an in-person interview, do it. But we'll come back to that. The first question I have, and as we go through, feel free to leave me any questions that you have in our chat box, and I will get back to you. The first question I wanted to know was, though, for those of you out there, can you see my screen? Can you see me? And can you see my screen? And if you could just let me know that in the chat box, that would be great. Can you see my PowerPoint? Just so we know going forward. Anybody out there? Anybody? I feel like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Like, anybody? Yes. You think so? You think you can see me? Okay, well, listen, thank you guys all. I really appreciate it. Like I said, just post any particular questions that you have in the questions section, and I'm going to leave time to come back to them, but I'm glad you can see my screen. Let's get going. Welcome to technology in a nutshell. Before I get started, if you don't mind, one of the things I'd like to do for the couple of you guys who are actually on with me is to do a quick poll just to figure out who all is, kind of where you are in the application process. So let me get started. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. If you don't know me, my name is Dr. Anita Paschall, and I totally go by Anita. I'm super casual. It's kind of the way I like to go. I am a dinosaur. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I've done it on all perspectives. As you see, I'm an MD, so I've been that anxious pre-med applying, and you will get some of my stories, but honestly, the advice I give you guys is really to keep you from making the same mistakes I made when I was a pre-med student. And I look back now and I think about the application I wrote, which, by the way, was on paper at the time. I took my MCAT on paper. Yet that gives you some idea. I turned 60 this year, so that gives you some idea of how old I am. But I look back at the things I wrote, the comments I made, like I totally knew what I was going to do in medicine, and my answers so robotic. I mean, they should have thrown me out of half my interviews. But I've been that pre-med student, got into med school, went through that whole course of things, but I've also worked in the industry. I've worked in private practice. I worked for over 15 years at a university. So I counseled pre-med applicants, did committee letters, but more importantly, I've spent the past, actually it's almost 35 years, sitting on medical admissions committees, doing reviews for 5 different admissions committees, as well as 2 DO programs. And that's the biggest aspect. I was actually on the phone this week with the director of admissions at Chapel Hill, and we were just laughing, reminiscing at the common, and I actually do a webinar called "Oh No, You Didn't, Common Applicant Mistakes." And trust me, we go through the list of things we've seen repeatedly over and over and over again, and you want to avoid those mistakes. So anyway, enough about me. What I'm really going to do today is to focus on secondary application essays, why they're important, the timing of those, some do's and don'ts, and then I'm really going to focus on some interview tips to help you guys be more successful. But what I want to do is, rather than sitting here, because I always hate people who read freaking slides off anyway, I'm going to clip through the slides, get the background information, and then I really want to spend time talking to you about the essence of what you put into things, how you think about them, and answering your questions regarding all of that information. So before I get started, like I said, I wanted to do a quick poll just to kind of find out where you guys are. And we're a small group today because people can't get in. But with that in mind, can you just give me a sense of if you've already applied, if you're planning to apply this upcoming cycle, kind of where you are in the application process? Can you see my poll? Ah, there we are. So you guys have already applied. Awesome. That's exactly what I needed to know. So let's talk about these freaking secondary applications and what you need to know. All right, so the first part of this is, when will I get these? How much time do I have to return them? How long are the typical essays, and what can you do to prepare for them before you receive them? So everybody's in all different aspects of this. And one of the things I did with all of my students is, we tried to click through in May, having their personal statement and experiences and school list prepared. So when applications opened in May, they could input all of that information. And then most of the students that I work with use the remainder of May and June to start pre-writing core essays. And we're going to talk about what some of those core essays are and why it's important to do those. And generally what I say is, build your school list. Go and look at the secondary questions that these schools, that your target schools asked over the past couple of years, and build a list of the most common ones. And we see them over and over and over. You'll see them in different fashion. You'll see them in different links. So what I typically say is, pick what is like the longest character count, skipping the no character length, by the way. And I will tell you, when they say no character length, swear to you, it's a trap by a lot of us, to see, can you concisely articulate what you need to say without blabbering on forever? Okay, so typically what we say is, there's a typical range between, there are some as few as like 50 to 100 characters or 50 words, but the average is generally somewhere around 200 to 500 words. That's kind of like a good ballpark. And honestly, truth be known, that's a good quality essay. Now, some of them are much shorter one-offs that don't require that. But if you're talking about a diversity, a time when you've overcome some particular hurdle, what other people would say about you, that's typically a solid 200 to 500 word essay. So I say, start by pre-writing a core at about 500 words that you could then cut down to smaller essay components. And then you can treat and street these for additional essays. And you go, well, why would I want to do that? Because currently about 90% of schools automatically generate secondaries. Some do it as soon as AMCAS or ACOMAS releases to schools. Others will do it as soon as you're verified. Others, whenever a school has finished their secondary. So I've got 3 of the schools that I work with this year are actually still refining their secondary essays. So although they will automatically generate them to everyone, they're actually not available from that school yet. So when AMCAS opened to schools the end of June, there was an influx of all those schools who had everything ready that automatically generated them. There will be another amount of schools that will do that, probably in some point in July. And then there is a small percentage of schools that waits until most of their faculty are back on campus the first part of August, pre-screen students, and then send secondaries, but they are totally the minority. Now that's a pro and a con, because that gives you a lot more shots at schools, but you've got to read the fine print, because I can promise you that every school that automatically generates secondaries, somewhere in the fine print, be it on the secondary, on their website, somewhere says, if you do not meet our screening criteria, your secondary application may not be opened or reviewed. Okay, and that is kind of a bank for admissions offices, because that's a whole lot of secondary application money to give students an opportunity to submit a secondary. But I worked for several schools last year that did not open 50% or more of their secondary applications because they didn't meet their screening criteria. So be very careful about that before you invest your time and your money. Now, when we're talking about the time to return these, generally what we say is, for automatically generated secondaries, the first thing you should do, check that application. Make sure they don't have a specific deadline. The average for most secondary applications is somewhere in the October to November, some even later range for these to be returned. But there are a lot of schools that have a 2-week or even as little as a 7-day turnaround. So when you get these First of all, sift through them all. Set them up if there is a date deadline. Secondly, if there is not, then prioritize. And what I say is generally, first of all, create a group that are simple to easy and street. A lot of these will be basic questions to identify your state of residency, your ties to the school, like little questions that you can answer quickly and send that one right back out. The average school, however, is going to have 3 to 5 essays of varying length. Some will have more. Miami, University of South Carolina, Greenville. Other schools have extensive 10 to 15 essays that can take a lot of time. Well, you don't want to get bogged down in that time if you haven't taken time to pre-write a lot of your essays in completing those. So first of all, those that you can quickly return. Secondly, you want to prioritize them by rank. You want to put your top choice schools just slightly behind schools that you can that are target schools. Okay, so you've got target and you've got your top rank. Gee, I really want to get in there. And you kind of want to prioritize those together because you want to get all those secondary essays returned ideally within 2 to 3 weeks. And this is what I've cautioned my students about repeatedly, because I always get, I want to go anywhere that will take me, or I'm going to apply to 75 schools. And I just sit there and go, no, 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 because burnout is hitting high and we're not even halfway through July. And that's because people that I work with spend so much time working on their primary, getting that personal statement and experiences in, and then we'll apply to 50 schools and burn out and end up not sending secondaries to a third of them. So you've just wasted your money and your investment, and you've become a reapplicant to a school you didn't do jack boo squat to. So the average AMCAS applicant applies to 7 to 15 schools. That's the average. Most of my students apply to around 20, but I've already told you 3 to 5 essays. Let's just say an average of 4. 20 times 4, that's 80 essays in 2 to 3 weeks. I couldn't do that. Most people can't do that. That's where the pre-writing comes in, and it's also where modifying core essays to reuse for schools comes in. Now, you're not going to get them all out in 2 to 3 weeks. And so a general rule is if you can get those out by roughly what I say, somewhere by the first part of August, okay? Now, if you've got DO programs in the mix, hopefully you got those out in May and June. But if not, remember you've got a little bit longer leeway with those, but they also grant earlier interviews. So you've got to balance that same thing. Figure out where you have the best target for. The other thing is, keep in mind if a school is rolling admissions or a single admission. So a lot of the Ivy League schools don't do admissions until March versus where most schools, about 80%, are rolling admissions. So the sooner you can return your secondary application and get in their pool, the sooner you're going to be in the review. And I always liken this to think about if you're trying to get into a competitive sporting event or you're trying to buy concert tickets. I guess the most recent one was like Taylor Swift and everybody was trying to get in and you want to be first in the queue. That's the same thing, literally, for med school applications. You want to get in the queue as quickly as possible to get prioritized to get into the interview process. Because just like you guys, like you get burned out writing essays, we get burned out reading them, we get burned out interviewing. So the sooner you can get in before, and typically for DO programs will start offering interviews somewhere the July-August range. Typical for MD is about the September timeframe. However, there will be a very few in August. So you want to figure that September to the first part of December will be a huge portion of their interviews. Most will break the first or second week of December, so you would love to get in before that. And we'll resume the first part of January with a big bulk going in January and then a remainder trickling in February and March. And there will be a few that will tail in, but a lot of those kind of become for the next year class. So that's why getting your secondaries in, getting that coveted interview in, and following that up is so critically important. All right, so we've talked about when you'll get them, 90% automatically generated. How long? 2 to 3 weeks. How long are the essays? An average of about 200 to 500 words with a great variation. What can you do to prepare for them? Pre-writing those core essays and using those essays to mix between schools. But then we're going to come with where the issues find. Now, what are the most common questions? Okay, pretty much every school is going to ask a diversity, a uniqueness, or what you bring to your school. And out the gate, before I tell you guys anything else, read, 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 and answer the prompt. Time and time again, I read a prompt, I get a secondary essay, and I went, well, this is a really nice essay. You didn't say jack about the prompt. Or you answered the first part of the prompt, but you didn't answer the other parts. That shows a med school, number one, you can't follow directions. Number two, you don't have an attention to detail. And number three, you were ready to get eliminated from the pool. And if you remember, the average school is going to get 10,000 applications for 300 to 500 interviews. You just made it really easy for me. So you've got to read the prompt and say, what are they asking me for? What do they want to know, and why do they want to know this? And obviously, diversity and uniqueness, we're not only looking for what you're going to bring to the future medical careers out there, like the people you're going to be able to serve, how you're going to be able to serve them, what personal experiences, your background, engagement, etc., are going to qualify you to work with different people, but also how you're going to fit into our class. Okay. And people often forget that is we're looking at how you're going to add to the diversity in our own class. The why this school, I often joke with a lot of my admissions officers about this very question because pretty much every school, and I am deep in secondary interviews right now. I can tell you that at this point, as of today, I have already reviewed over 300 separate school secondary essays, not just individual essays, I mean school. So 300 school submissions for students as of today. I haven't even started reviewing at the med school level. Okay, and the why this school, there are days at this point where if I read one more time about how your school's unique curriculum, which provides critical patient exposure early in the process, it sets you apart from other schools. That just shows your ignorance because every school now provides for early clinical exposure. Now, it's great to recognize that, but don't tell me you're different from every other program. And I often chuckle because the truth be known, if you were to ask every applicant, and I wish to God someday somebody would actually say this, the truth is, I want a white piece of paper that says MD on it because students want to get into any program because only 40% of applicants ever get accepted. But you can't say that, obviously, on an application. What schools want to know is that you're not just throwing up a thesaurus on a piece of paper with your school's great curriculum and opportunities for research and opportunities for service. Every freaking school does that. Give me specifics. Tell me what specific programs you're interested in and why you're interested in that program and how it matches something that you've done. You've got background in mental health, so they have a special component of their mental health in their curriculum that addresses mental health. They may have a combined MD MPH program that you're interested in or an MBA program. They may have certain aspects of an area that they want to serve that you have exposure to. Or more importantly for you, maybe you've got a very strong Hispanic connection and they are centered in an area with a high concentration, or maybe it's an area where you want to work in the future. But we hear the same stuff time and time again. Be unique, be different, but point something out. Same thing, personal challenge or moral dilemma. There are days on end where I read that your greatest personal challenge was like not doing well on the MCAT. That right there will get you eliminated immediately because we literally chuckle on AdComs going, Okay, so you really had nothing happen in your life. I mean, I've got students who have battled homelessness, who have battled addiction, who have watched their houses burn to the ground, lost a parent, who have battled cancer themselves, who have lost parents while in college, who have had to put themselves through school. We are truly looking for a challenge that has put you out there. I read a review recently from a student who talked about a personal dilemma, or I've loved the ones where it's been, tell me about a time where you didn't get something that you deserved and you thought you should have, or how it was handled. And the student actually reversed it and talked about a time when she did something where she should have been fired for what she did, and was able to admit her mistake, talk about how her coworkers and people worked with her to help her overcome that, but also let her know that she was normal, that this happens. And I thought, wow, what character, what uniqueness, what a personal reflection, because it shows the school an ability to overcome something, an ability to be honest and sincere. Those are the types of things. And what we hate time and time again is people who look at my writing skills, where it's just like a thesaurus of vomit all in an essay that says absolutely nothing. And it is what you guys have heard me talk about, politicians speak. And the ethos of the center of your program, where I can contribute esoterically to blah, 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 blah. And I just go, yeah, you ain't said jack. That is a politician who stands up before me with big $100 words and never tells me anything, how you're going to fix it, how you have personal experience with it, or whatever. And that will get you eliminated faster than just about anything. We also get post-college activities. When we're talking about your gap year opportunities, or what you're doing, or what you've done, or the additional time you've taken, you need to be specific, and you need to highlight what you're doing and how it will bolster your application. And I mean, be specific. I will be working full-time doing this, increasing my clinical capacity, as well as I learn to adapt the patient-physician relationship. I will be working in the following service endeavors. I will be continuing my relationships with these types of programs, whatever. Talking about your research and articulating what you've done, all very, very common questions. Also, long-term goals. And this is one of the things I want to talk to you about, because a lot of schools always talk about, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Another cardinal mistake. Please never, ever, ever repeat the prompt back to me, because I quit listening to you. Tell me where you see yourself in 10 years. In 10 years, I envision myself. Yeah, thank you. You got nothing better than that? I need you to be able to articulate where you see your process, which is really funny, because if you think about where you're going to be in 10 years, wait, I got 4 years for med school and a bare minimum of 3 years for residency, most 4. And if you do a fellowship, so a lot of you guys aren't even going to be getting out of school, or just getting out of school in 10 years. They do not expect you to directly know what you want to go into. You may have ideas of what you want to do. So the first thing I always encourage people to acknowledge is that you look forward to using med school and your clinical rotations to expose you to other potential areas you may not have the opportunity to have already explored. But if you have an idea of what you want to do, say, my current experience has given me a definite pull towards, and then explain why. Okay. It's also where you're talking about personal insight. Oftentimes, med schools will say, what are the 5 characteristics that you see are important to a physician? And which ones do you think are most critical, or which one? I need to be able to find that in your essay. I cannot tell you the number of times you need to start out with, although there are many characteristics that embody a qualified physician, to me, 5 that would be critical, and go A, B, C, D, E. Okay. And then say, and with regard to these, probably to me, paramount would be, and then why, so that I can actually follow what the heck you're talking about. If it specifically asks you to pick one, by golly, you better put that at the beginning of your essay. Okay. Your most important activity. This is one that really ticks me off, because there are a lot of schools out there that are really trying to justify the dime that they charge for their secondary essays. So they will literally say, list 3 of your most important activities or accomplishments. And I'm going, wait, didn't we already put that in your 3 most meaningful? Yeah, you did. And you're probably going to be able to repeat them. But if they were to ever get called out about their secondary essays, they would be that. Now, this might be an opportunity for you to say, in my 3 most meaningful experiences, these 3 were particularly important to me. However, if I had had the opportunity to discuss others, or since my primary application, I have been doing this, this has become very clinically important or whatever, then you might take that approach. All right, so let's talk about said game plan. All right, I've already told you, focus your energy on your top choice schools. Hold off sending secondary essays to more competitive schools till you've refined a couple of your kind of target programs. But again, when I say hold off, I'm talking like a week, okay? Week and a half, not a month and a half, all right? Reply first to schools with easy essays to answer and that you can give a solid answer for through your previous pre-writing. I always encourage, if you did not take advantage of that time, outline your secondary essays first before you start writing them. And here are my tips. And I'm going to go through these quickly, and then we're going to leave those for Q&A when we come back. All right, I've already told you, read the freaking prompt. Read and answer the prompt, and make sure you have included language that indicates you've read the prompt. There may be multiple parts. Make sure you have addressed all of them. And that can be tough, because I actually had one this week that was 200 characters and 4 parts, and it was supposed to discuss a challenge, how you overcame it, and how it will help you for the future. And I was like, how the heck am I supposed to answer that? But they are looking for your ability to do that. Do not repeat topics. Oftentimes, secondary essays will have overlap between questions. Try to acknowledge as previously stated and then potentially add to it, but don't basically copy and paste the same answer. That basically shows laziness. All right. Now, stay within your character length. And I cannot emphasize this enough. If they give you 200 characters or less. Now, the counter to this is oftentimes, and at Chapel Hill, we give 500 words. All right. Now, that does not mean blabber on for 500 words. Say what you need to say to answer the prompt and cut it off. Oftentimes, we are looking to see if you can articulate that in 250 words. Because a prompt is no character limit, 500, 1,000, 6,000, it does not necessarily mean, and ideally, not use all of those. But if it says 200 characters and you try to slide in 210, a lot of times we allow space in our box for more than that, again, to see if you will follow directions. All right. So number 1, stay within character count. Number 2, do not blabber on incessantly to try to reach character or word count just because it offers it. Once you've answered the prompt, shut up. All right. Be clear and concise. And I cannot tell you how important this is. I've already talked about throwing up a thesaurus, and I have a few of my students who just like to use those $500 dictionary words. It does not impress me at all. However, I am also not impressed by your limited vocabulary, just like we talked about in your personal statements. Okay, when you try to avoid words like I got lucky. No, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to. Okay, it sounds more professional. I often see people who feel like they're trying to be conversational, and you should be conversational to an extent, but not so casual. Another thing to avoid, and I'm getting this over and over again this year, oftentimes when we did experiences, I would say abbreviate in your experience title or in your contact information, like big brother, big sister, up in that content, BBBS, so that in your experience you could write BBBS. However, in a secondary, oftentimes people reviewing secondaries are not the same people reviewing your application. And I've had people go, well, I used that in my application. Oh yeah, because I got all that time to go back to your application, try to look up a freaking long abbreviation to figure out what the heck you're talking about. So make sure that you put it in context. Even if you're talking about the school, if the school hasn't used it in the prompt, you spell out their whole first name first, then put the school name in abbreviation, okay? Never, ever, ever start a paragraph or a prompt with I, and limit how many times you use I to start a sentence. I have gotten so many secondaries this year where it's I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. First of all, it makes you not look like a team player. It makes you look narcissistic, which most of you are not, and it also makes you look one-dimensional. So there's so many things to consider in writing a strong, powerful secondary essay. And the thing is, your primary application, I've already told you, your personal statement is the least important part of your application. Could not be truer. Okay, we're screening on your GPA and your MCAT score. We're getting to these statements in your experiences and switching those out. Our secondary essays are often, hey, I want to know a little bit more about this person. So the time you invest on writing strong essays is important. It can be a further extension of yourself that was not in your personal statement. And by the way, I laughed. Personal statement recently, swear to you, 5,300 characters, first line said, this is not nearly enough characters to fully articulate everything about me. Seriously? How to get denied quickly. Same thing with your secondary essays. If you don't give me any more insight, this is where you can expand on experiences you didn't have time to in 700 characters in your experiences. This is where you can tell me stories. And I can't emphasize enough, starting with answering the prompt and then giving me an example. For example, Sue was somebody that I worked with, and just like we did in personal statement and experiences, please do not say Dr. C. Give me a name. But when it comes to patients, don't say Mr. Perkins, just say Al. And and it does not have to be their names. Nobody's going to ask you to bring them into your interview. So I always say, pick a small name, Sue, Al, whatever, that'll fit in, and just remember it. If you're asked about it in an interview, you know what you're talking about. All right, be careful copying, pasting. I say this every year, and every year I get a panic attack from a student who used a great diversity essay. Because remember, a lot of schools are asking the same question, right? They copied and pasted from Tulane into their Chapel Hill interview, telling me what all they were going to do at Tulane. And we see it over and over. It's not going to eliminate you from an interview, but it's definitely going to be a sign that you didn't have an attention to detail. Again, we've talked about character count, remaining flexible, but also be yourself, okay? You want me to get a sense of who you are. And not everybody's the greatest writer, but if you can figure out how to express yourself in a strong manner, I can't even explain to you how often it goes, I want to interview this person. And we want to see if that embodiment that we're seeing in that secondary comes across in that interview, which is what we're getting ready to turn to, the interviews. All right. So if you guys have questions about secondaries, go ahead and post them in the chat box. It'll give me an opportunity to sort of see what your thoughts are. Now, when we come to interviews, the majority of schools this year are going to either be virtual or they're going to be virtual and in person. And I'm really struggling with this because I feel like during the pandemic, a lot of schools got really lazy going, ooh, this is an easy way for us to get more students through, not exhaust our time, just put them all out there on a screen. And as we saw already with this interview, technical issues happen. Things buzz in and out. We lose connections. And honestly, it just ain't personal. And I can't even explain to you how great, how much better we often feel because we get to see people in the interview room. We get to speak with them in person. We get to truly feel, and yes, you can see them through a screen. And and honestly, schools have said, we want to save students money from having to get on planes and fly and take their time. It's like this much of it. The truth is, it's easier on us. So if a school takes the time to offer virtual and in-person interviews, always, if possible, do in person. And remember, be it in the interview room or in person, look professional, act professional at all times because your interview starts the minute you come onto that camera or the minute you walk through the door. Okay. It's your dress, it's your tone of voice, it's your eye contact, it's the way you present yourself. And I know you're going to be nervous, but you need to build a bridge and get over that because you need to be engaging and interactive because we want to know. And I'm going to tell you, I can't tell you the times that people looked wonderful on paper and got into the interview room and laid an egg, and that can be 60% of your interview process, and everything went out the door. So it's how you dress. And let's start with that. Let's talk about how you dress. All right. In terms of how you dress, you should wear a suit. Okay. And if you are in your interview space, you should dress in your suit and tie. Women, it should be suits. It can be pants or skirt. It does not matter. Okay. We typically say for men that we want in this order, charcoal or navy, then black. Okay. My son bought two. He bought a charcoal and a navy because he bought interview shirts and ties to match every specific school's kind of traditional colors. So at Chapel Hill, he had a light blue shirt with a blue and yellow tie. At Wake Forest, which blew me away, he wore his charcoal suit with kind of a lighter charcoal gray shirt and a yellow, black, and gold, a yellow, gold, and kind of a white tie. And I was nervous, but when he put it together, it popped, and everybody in his interview day commented on how sharply he was dressed. That's a first impression, and you cannot unmake those. Okay, make sure that the girls are covered for women. Make sure if you wear skirts that they are long enough. I cannot tell you the times that I could tell you the color of underwear that a girl was wearing, and it makes a very bad impression. For guys, you want to wear a dark suit, even if you're interviewing virtually, because we've actually had interviewers ask the interview person to stand up. You don't want to be wearing your boxers or your pajamas underneath the bottom part of what you got on. The other thing is that you always want to, for guys, you want a dark suit coat with a pastel or some type of colored shirt, not white, with a power tie. And when I say power tie, not a red and black striped tie, I'm talking about a tie with a dynamic, engaging print or color palette. I always say, pick the tie first, match the shirt to it, and then pick your suit coat that goes with it. For women, do not wear colored shirts, okay? And you're like, what do you mean don't wear a colored shirt? Because you do not have the benefit of a tie, and so you can never get those little points to lay where they're supposed to. You want a scoop neck or straight neck camisole blouse underneath your jacket so that it lays flat, and pick a power color, whatever color looks best on you, be it a royal blue, a purple, whatever goes with your suit. Same thing, make sure that you pick a conservative earring that does not drop more than 1 inch. And if you wear a necklace, make sure it is something unique that if potentially someone asked you about it, you could comment on it. See, all these things. When you walk into your interview space, if it's in person, you walk to the person checking you in. You shake their hand. You introduce yourself. You work engagingly with the other people you're interviewing with. Leave your freaking cell phone away or make sure it is cut off and in your pocket. I do not want to see them out the entire interview day. I can't tell you the times I walked in where somebody's on their cell phone or even on a laptop. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm finishing an assignment. On your interview day? No. Be prepared for any and all questions. And this goes for your secondary essays as well as your interview questions. Number one, before you start your secondary essays or your interview day, I have my students do what's called an applicant strengths document, where you list out your MCAT score, your GPA, your top 5 selling points, be that your international background, your research experience, your clinical exposure, founding a program, a hurdle you've overcome. Maybe you've battled cancer, maybe you've lost a parent, maybe you've worked full time. What are your 5 selling points? Your goal in an interview is to take every single question you get answered. You want to answer the question because you gotta, all right? And then use that question as a springboard to highlight something about yourself, okay? And you can say, they may ask you, why is a career in medicine the right career for you? And I had somebody the other week who talked about getting tubes in her ears when she was 4. And from that moment, she knew she wanted to be a doctor. And I went, yeah, right. Okay. Your in and out outpatient procedure was life changing in your life. And how much do you remember from when you were 4? Nobody at 4 has somebody come down, hit them on the head, and go, boing, you want to be a physician. That is not going to hold water with us, and they will eat you alive. You need to have valid, strong stories to back up what you've done. And your goal should be at the end of your interview to have been able to highlight components from your application such that, and a typical interviewer, the way most schools work it is you have a committee member who reviews your application for components of it, and one member of your interview committee who's going to speak on your behalf. And we typically review those as little as the end of the week. The average is 2 weeks after, but it can be further. So let's say I don't review you for 2 weeks after 2 months after you've interviewed. When I open your application and I've maybe interviewed 300 people, 200 people since you, and I go, oh, that's the girl with that unique story about blah, 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 and why I wanted to add. What were the 5 unique things about you? So we have all my students list their GPA and their MCAT, so it's ready in their head. I had them do their class components, clinical, leadership, academic, service, and social, all the things they've done in a bullet list. And then at the bottom, their 5 selling points and 10 unique things about them. That way, you're already armed going into an interview with things you've done, things you know, and you're comfortable talking about them. So you answer the question and then you start highlighting things about yourself. Review your application and research the school. Know when it was founded, know unique things about it, know programs that they have. And if you get your list of interviewers before your interview, absolutely know who your interviewers are if you can research it. And if schools allow thank you notes, send them to you. They don't move the needle at all. You can send them by mail, but with most things being in virtual, it's fine to send them by email. But I'm going to tell you, a thank you note should be just as long as they are. Thank you so much for taking the time to interview me. Last Wednesday, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you about something from your interview. I look forward to speaking with you further. If you use the thank you note as a platform to send a letter of continued interest or a letter of intent, it is as bad as flubbing your interview. So it's important to know what you're doing. So we've actually got about 15 minutes left, and I want to use this time to actually talk more about kind of what we're doing. But before we do, I would like to know if those of you out there have any interest in knowing more about how to prepare for the MCAT, how to navigate the admissions process if you're not already an admissions counseling student, and how to boost your GPA. If you're interested in any of these things, please let me know. But I'm going to use this additional time to really talk to you about answer any of your questions, because at TPR, we can help you get great grades through tutor.com. We can help you get great test scores through our practice test, and we can help you get into med school with our application packages to help you prepare the best applications, interviews, etc. But more importantly, we need to know how to be good at all of this. So if you have any questions, let me close this. And let me see if I can answer any of the questions that you have. So let me close this and say, I think so. It's toward the bottom, partially cut off. How do we handle questions that ask about experiences already described in the personal statement or experiences section of our primary application? Now, again, I already told you that a lot of times this will be duplicated, like you may be talking about information, and the truth is, if they're that meaningful, they should be in your primary personal statement and your experiences. You don't even need to say as referenced in my experiences. So let's say, for instance, you worked as an EMT for 3 years. Okay. And obviously that's been a most meaningful experience. And you can say something to the effect, and my clinical exposure this far in shadowing physicians, working as an EMT, and now as an MA have provided me with a breadth of opportunities to blah, 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 blah. Probably one of the most impactful has been the 5 years I spent as an EMT or whatever. So you can re-reference those. Again, most of us are not reviewing those parts of those unless we're the person specifically assigned to review your entire application. In other programs that help you with med school applications, they suggest using anecdotes, which can be tricky with shorter character counts. Man, you are not kidding. So how do you balance that with just answering the question concisely? So if you've got limited character count, you've got to make sure that you answer the question. And in most cases, if we're asking for like a very short prompt where it's like 100, 200 characters, then you cannot use an anecdote. Anecdotes are going to have to be saved for it where you have at least 100 to 200 words. And then even then it's going to be a short reference. So anecdotes are important, but only if the character count allows it. And we don't expect that if we've given you such a short character count. There is one, like there are schools where it says, would you give yourself a nickname? And what would your nickname be? And you might, instead of just going, my nickname would be, again, repeating that crap back to me, rather start with, throughout my life, I have always been the one who has to get, I'm an organization freak or whatever I should be. And I may be OCDQ, and that means I'm the OCD queen. And that might be the very last statement you make. And so you may just have to reference something to get it into that. So it is truly a balancing act. I have had a new personal experience of becoming a new mom. Oh, that's wonderful, over this application cycle. But I've had to balance complications with working this into something that I can talk about for a challenge. And that's actually a really, really good challenge. On a completely different level, I lost my best friend, who was my dog, in May. And on the day that I lost my baby girl, that night that she was passing away, I actually got a message from somebody who I had spoken to almost a year ago, who asked me if I was still looking for this particular type of puppy. Never into secondary season would I be bringing a new puppy or a new baby into where we were, because that means sleepless nights and having to watch somebody and balance time when somebody gets fussy who doesn't understand, oh, excuse me, I've got to finish these applications or whatever. But as you figure out how to balance that, how you learn to appreciate juggling that, and actually showing that maturity of becoming a new mom is actually an excellent thing to highlight this and how you will balance that going forward. I had to balance becoming a new mom while in residency and working on my PhD, and the same type of thing happening. And funny story with that, I was working on my PhD research in between my residency rotations, and we were eating macaroni and cheese because we were making $19,000 a year at the time, and I couldn't afford childcare. And I remember my mother came to see me in the lab that I was working with, and there were radioactive, danger, radioactive content signs. And I had a baby swing and a little pack and play beside me trying to do my research while raising my newborn. And I swear to you, my mother literally took my child out of my baby swing, walked out the door and said, "You can have her back when you're done with all of this." And so, but learning how to balance that forethought or what you're doing and how you do it to succeed is actually a very good experience and would stand out to us. By dynamic ties, do you mean in terms of just color? Oh, ties, like shirt ties, or something like with a pattern or design. Typically, we are looking, a power tie can be something that has bold stripes on it. So maybe a really unique color play. Oftentimes, like with a navy suit and a light blue shirt, if you can put a bright yellow with a little white streak and a black streak and a light blue streak in it, it can really make that shirt pop. Or finding something that has a very unique pattern on it. Now, that does not mean bringing it. I had somebody come in one day with like stethoscopes all over their tie. Yeah, that's a little overkill, not very good. So either a very unique pattern that is going to pull out the color of your shirt, or dynamic stripes, but also, just like I tell you in your essay questions to avoid repeating cliches, avoid cliches in your interview, please avoid that black and red tie. If I see a black and red tie one more time, it's the same thing of reading all these essays about serving underserved populations. Obviously, that's a priority, but truth be known, if every one of you tell me how you are dedicating your life to serving the underserved and underserved areas, of which about less than 1% actually truly do that, I'm so tired of reading that. And you've got to tailor to the questions, okay? But also be realistic. Like, you ain't gonna spend in your life running working with Doctors Without Borders. I've had less than 5.5% of my people actually do that. But if you can say that I am already committing to setting aside 2 weeks to a month every year of my practice to engage in international healthcare, or I want to become, and I get so little of this, actively involved in my state and national academies, working with directly politicians in Washington, D.C. to advance healthcare, things nobody thinks about, being the person in their community. And I keep, oh, a physician should be a person and an advocate in their community. How are you planning on doing that? What exactly are you planning to do in your community? Are you really going to commit one night a week to volunteering at a free clinic? Great, please do that. Are you going to advocate on the front lines? Please tell me that, but don't just lofty ideas of a politician. Sorry, we digress. But that is what I meant by a power tie. Great question. Some secondary applications ask for coursework similarly to the way AMCAS did, and when they have drop-down menus for me to choose from the courses listed on the AMCAS application to place them in categories. Do I include all coursework even if I fulfill their requirements without placing each of my courses in a category? Unfortunately, this is another one of those where they're just looking at questions to repeat it, and it's laborious and it's time to do it, but you should include everything so that they, especially if they have specific requirements that are outside AMCAS's core requirements, you want to make sure that you list those. Actually had one the other day where there was actually a discrepancy. It was actually with Brown, where what they had on MSAR was less than what they actually asked for on their secondary, which was way more than what AMCAS asked for. And that's where I'm always saying, when you're picking your schools, make sure that you list this information. And there are specific instances where on AMCAS they required biochem 3 credit hours. Very few schools require the additional lab. And then on their application, they asked for 4 hours, which seemed to indicate a lab. And you may only have 3 hours of biochem, so you list it and then you state, I will look to add this additional core requirement if they require that. All right. As a non-traditional student, I've worked full-time since college in non-medical public health fields. How could I turn that into something med schools want to hear about? Oh, well, now this is actually a very, very good question. Number one, we love the traditional applicant and we love career changers, okay, because you bring so much to the table. Okay, especially those who have worked in like areas of finance, who have worked in R&D, who maybe have been in clinical R&D and are now transitioning, or maybe have worked as a nurse, or have worked in, I've got somebody who's a lawyer who's now choosing to apply. And we really love to see how your interplay with other individuals, working with different populations, engagement in areas of, especially like finance. I'm going to tell you, physicians are like the worst physicians, worst business people on the planet. So if you've got a way to actually tailor your experiences, again, remember, I'm looking at what you can bring to my class. And it's funny that you asked that question, because I can tell you when I was in med school, again, as a dinosaur, those people who were older, career changers, had worked in different fields, brought, without a doubt, some of the most meaningful experiences to us, and honestly who I learned the most from when I was in med school. And I was that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, applied as a junior, like, which nobody does anymore. 70% of students apply at graduating seniors having taken a gap year. But it's interesting that those are actually the people we seem to learn the most from. That is a strength, and it will be seen as a strength. However, I will tell you, as a non-traditional student working in another area, we still expect you to have the clinical exposure, and we definitely expect you to have engaged in service, or at least since in deciding to apply, that you're engaging in service and continuing to do so. Well, that's right on time, and it looks like I don't have any other questions. I apologize for any issues with you guys logging in. I wish you all the best, and if we can help you and you have any questions, please send them to questions@review.com so we can get them answered, and I will be sending out this webinar to all of you. Thank you so much for attending. I look forward to hopefully working with you, and I hope you all have a great day.